When I bought my property at the edge of the lake, I thought I had finally escaped all the noise and nonsense of city life. The land was wide open and beautiful, 5 acres of peace that overlooked the water. I wanted to build my dream house there, a quiet retirement project after decades of hard work. What I didn't know was that even out here, trouble could find you, especially when it wears the name HOA. At first, everything seemed calm. The neighboring houses were spaced far apart, and there was no sign of anyone telling others what to do. I even asked my real estate agent before buying, "Are there any HOA rules or restrictions I should know about?" She checked the documents and said, "No, this is outside the HOA's boundary. You'll be free to do what you want here." That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Months later, construction began. I hired a local builder and a few guys I trusted. The design was simple but elegant. A single-story house with a large porch facing the lake, a small dock, and a garden area for my wife. Every morning, I'd stop by the site with coffee in hand, talking with the crew about progress. The smell of wood and fresh paint was like therapy. But then one day, as I was standing near the foundation, a white SUV rolled up. Out stepped a woman wearing oversized sunglasses, a clipboard in one hand and a sour expression like she'd been chewing lemons. She didn't introduce herself right away. She just started walking around, taking photos of everything. I asked politely, "Can I help you?" Without even looking at me, she said, "I'm from the Lakeside Community Homeowners Association. You're violating our property regulations by building so close to the ridge." I frowned. There must be a mistake. My property isn't part of your HOA. I made sure of that before I bought it. She finally looked at me then, with that smug, condescending grin that people in power always have when they think they've caught someone doing something wrong. "That's funny," she said. "All properties around this lake are governed by our HOA. You'll be hearing from our board soon." Before I could respond, she got back into her car and drove off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a rising sense of irritation in me. I went straight home and dug up every piece of paperwork from my purchase. Deed, property line, boundary maps. Everything clearly showed that my lot was outside of the HOA's jurisdiction. There was a line, quite literally, that separated their zone from mine. My property sat just a few feet beyond that border. I wasn't under their control at all. The next morning, I sent copies of the documents to their office, thinking it would clear everything up. I wrote a short note. "Dear Lakeside HOA, this property is not within your jurisdiction. Please refrain from further contact regarding this construction. My name." I thought that would be the end of it. Oh, how wrong I was. A week later, I came back to the site to find a large red notice nailed to one of the wooden beams. It said, "Stop work immediately. Violation of HOA Code 4.3. The workers looked at me, confused. I tore the paper down and said, "Keep working. They have no authority here." But that evening, my builder called me worried. "Sir," he said, "we got an email from the HOA saying they'll fine me $5,000 if I keep building on your property. I can't afford that kind of risk." Now I was furious. They weren't just harassing me. They were trying to stop my project by intimidating the people working for me. I called the HOA office, and sure enough, the same woman from before answered. "Why are you harassing my crew?" I demanded. "Sir," she said, her tone icy, "you're constructing a home that blocks the view of the lake for several HOA members. You're in violation of our community standards." I laughed bitterly. "Your community standards don't apply to me. You can't fine anyone, you can't stop me, and you can't claim this land. You're wasting your time." She just said, "We'll see what the judge thinks," and hung up. 2 days later, I was served legal papers. The HOA had filed a lawsuit against me, accusing me of illegally constructing a residence within protected HOA territory and obstructing community lakeview rights. My wife couldn't believe it. "They can't really do this, can they?" she asked. I shrugged, though I was more angry than calm. "They can try, but they're going to regret it." I hired an attorney, an old friend named Rick, a man who'd been practicing property law for 30 years. When I handed him the case files, he just shook his head and smirked. "They've messed with the wrong guy. This is going to be fun." For the next few weeks, we gathered every document, photo, and record we could. The land surveyor who originally mapped the boundary even gave a sworn statement confirming that my property was completely independent from the HOA's oversight. We had receipts, permits, and an official county letter confirming the same. Meanwhile, the HOA went on their little campaign against me. They sent letters to my neighbors warning them that I was violating community harmony. They even held a meeting, which I wasn't invited to, where they called my home an eyesore. Ironically, it wasn't even finished yet. Then came the kicker. One of their members approached me in the grocery store, someone I'd never even met. She said, "I heard your house is ruining the lake view from my deck. You should just take it down and rebuild somewhere else." I just smiled and replied, "Ma'am, if you wanted a view, maybe you should have bought land closer to the water." Then I walked away before she could say anything else. The lawsuit hearing was set for early spring. By that time, my house was nearly done. I wasn't about to stop now. I wanted the judge to see exactly what they were complaining about, a clean, beautiful, modest home built legally on my own land. When the day finally came, I put on my best suit, grabbed my files, and headed to court. The HOA arrived with their president, their lawyer, and about 5 board members sitting behind them like it was some kind of performance. The woman with the clipboard, her name was Marla, was front and center, looking smug as ever. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a calm face, took his seat. "Let's begin," he said. "Case number 5143, Lakeside Homeowners Association versus my name." Marla's lawyer stood up first, giving a dramatic opening speech about how I had defied community rules, disrupted scenic integrity, and lowered the value of neighboring properties. He even showed pictures of the lake, claiming my house destroyed the natural line of sight. When he was done, the judge turned to me. "Do you have a response?" I nodded, stood up, and handed over a neatly organized folder. "Yes, Your Honor. I have proof that my property is not, and has never been, under the jurisdiction of the Lakeside HOA." I walked him through the deed, the county maps, and the letter from the surveyor. The judge took his time flipping through each page. The HOA's attorney tried to interrupt several times, saying things like, "Those maps must be outdated, and the HOA boundary is flexible depending on view rights," but the judge simply raised a hand for silence. After a long moment, the judge looked up, and that's when it happened. He laughed. Not a chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh. "Mr. My Name," he said, still smiling, "you're absolutely right. This land isn't under the HOA's authority. In fact, the boundary maps filed with the county show a clear separation line. The HOA has no jurisdiction here whatsoever." The HOA board members looked shocked. Marla's face went pale. The judge continued, "I have to say, this is one of the most ridiculous lawsuits I've seen in years." Case dismissed. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After the judge's laughter faded, the courtroom went quiet. You could almost hear the disbelief dripping off every HOA member's face. The gavel came down with a solid thud that echoed in the room, and just like that, it was over. The case was dismissed in under 30 minutes. I remember standing there, half smiling, half stunned, while Marla and her crew scrambled to gather their folders. Her lawyer tried to say something about appealing the decision, but the judge cut him off before he could even finish. "I strongly advise against that," the judge said, still with a hint of amusement in his tone. "You'd be wasting everyone's time and money." Marla glared at me as she stormed out of the room, muttering something about how this isn't over. I didn't bother responding. I just shook my lawyer's hand and walked outside with the biggest grin I'd had in months. The sun was shining, and for the first time since this nonsense began, I felt like the world had tilted back into balance. Rick clapped me on the shoulder as we stepped into the parking lot. "Told you this would be fun," he said, smirking. "Yeah," I replied. "But something tells me they won't let this go so easily." He gave a dry laugh. "Probably not. But they can't touch you. Legally, they've got nothing." I wanted to believe him. I really did. Over the next week, the news of the courtroom defeat spread like wildfire around the neighborhood. People I'd never even met were suddenly stopping by my property, some just to congratulate me, others out of curiosity. Apparently, Marla had been bragging for weeks that she was going to teach me a lesson and set an example for anyone who dared ignore HOA rules. The fact that it backfired so publicly must have stung. A couple of neighbors who were part of the HOA even apologized. One of them, an older man named Frank, came by with a six-pack of beer and said, "You don't know how long we've been waiting for someone to stand up to those clowns. They act like they own everything within sight of the lake." I left and invited him to sit on the porch. We watched the sunset over the water, the same view they claimed I'd stolen from them. Frank shook his head and said, "It's not even blocking anything. If anything, your house fits right in. They just like controlling people." He wasn't wrong. A few days later, I noticed a pattern of little annoyances starting up. It began small. My trash cans mysteriously knocked over, muddy tire tracks near my driveway, and HOA newsletters stuffed into my mailbox, even though I wasn't a member. Then came the anonymous complaint letters taped to my gate. "Your exterior paint doesn't match community standards. Your dock lights are too bright. Please remove unapproved vegetation." It was laughable. Every time I found one, I'd just throw it away. But after the third week, I realized this wasn't random. Marla was behind it. She was angry and trying to make my life miserable. I ran into her again at the grocery store. She was in line ahead of me, pretending not to see me, but the tension was thick. Finally, I said, "How's the view from your place these days?" "Still blocked." Her jaw tightened, and she turned around sharply. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. I shrugged. The judge did. She grabbed her bags and stormed off. I thought that was the end of it, but later that evening, I found a letter in my mailbox with an official-looking HOA letterhead. It read, "Due to ongoing disputes and community disruption caused by your property, the Lakeside HOA Board has voted to pursue damages for loss of property value and emotional distress to members affected by your construction." I actually laughed out loud. They were trying again. I called Rick the next morning and read the letter to him. He laughed even harder than I did. "They can't sue for emotional distress because of your house. That's not how property law works. They're bluffing." "Should I just ignore it?" I asked. He paused. "Not this time. Let's hit them back harder. File a counterclaim for harassment. They've crossed the line." And so, that's exactly what we did. We filed a complaint against the HOA and Marla personally, citing harassment, attempted interference with legal construction, and defamation. Rick attached every fake notice, every bogus complaint, and even the emails they'd sent to my builder threatening him. The county office didn't take it lightly. The HOA's actions were a clear overreach of authority. Within 2 weeks, they were summoned to a hearing. This time, the judge wasn't amused. He was furious. When we showed him the evidence, he shook his head and said, "This is outrageous. You people are not a government agency. You have no jurisdiction over this man or his property." Marla tried to defend herself. "But, Your Honor, his house obstructs." "Obstructs what?" the judge interrupted. "The sunlight? The clouds? Your personal opinion of what a view should look like." The courtroom burst into quiet laughter again. Marla's lawyer just looked defeated. The judge leaned forward, his tone stern. "If I see another complaint from your HOA regarding this property, I will consider sanctions. Am I clear?" That was the moment Marla finally shut her mouth. After court, Rick and I walked out feeling victorious for the second time. But what made it even sweeter was what came next. The local newspaper ran a small piece about the case. "Homeowner wins against HOA harassment." It spread fast, and before long, other residents in the area started realizing how little power the HOA really had. Meetings were canceled, board members resigned, and Marla's reputation crumbled. One afternoon, as I was finishing up some landscaping near the porch, Frank came by again laughing. "You know what they're calling you around here now," he said. I looked up from the dirt. "What?" "The HOA Slayer." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my shovel. From then on, life got peaceful again. My wife finally got to plant her flowers, and I spent my evenings on the porch watching the sun dip below the lake, the same view that started all this nonsense. But as much as I wanted to move on, there was still a small part of me that wanted to make sure Marla learned her lesson permanently. So I decided to build something extra, a tall wooden fence on the side of my property that faced her house. Nothing illegal, just a simple privacy barrier. When it went up, I saw her standing in her yard, staring at it like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. She shouted something across the distance, but I couldn't hear, and honestly, I didn't care. The irony was perfect. The woman who claimed my house blocked her view, now couldn't see anything at all. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea, sat back in my rocking chair, and smiled at the quiet lake before me. For the first time since moving there, it truly felt like home. And if anyone ever wonders why I keep all those court papers framed in my office, I tell them it's a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't anger or shouting. It's building exactly what you want, where you're allowed to, and letting your success be the loudest thing in the room. ChatGPT said. After the fence went up, peace finally started settling in, but word travels fast in small communities, especially ones ruled by gossiping HOA members. The next few weeks were quiet on my end, but chaos was brewing behind the scenes. Apparently, not everyone in the Lakeside HOA was thrilled about Marla's little crusade against me. I first heard about it from Frank again. He came by one morning while I was trimming some bushes near the driveway. "You won't believe what happened last night," he said, grinning like a kid with a secret. The HOA board had an emergency meeting. Marla got called out by half the members for dragging the entire association into 2 embarrassing lawsuits. I raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding." "Nope." One of the treasurers even resigned on the spot. Said he's tired of wasting everyone's dues money on Marla's personal vendettas. Apparently, they've spent nearly 20 grand on legal fees between your case and the appeal that never even got filed. That made me pause for a moment. $20,000. Over nothing. All because one woman couldn't handle the idea that someone outside her control built a house near her lakeview. I chuckled and shook my head. Guess they finally realized who the real problem is. Frank smirked. They sure did. Word is they're voting next week to remove her as president. I didn't say anything, but deep down, I felt something that I hadn't since the whole mess began. Satisfaction. Not the vengeful kind, but the kind that comes when justice finally balances the scales on its own. For the first time in months, the tension in the neighborhood started to lift. The gossip about me slowly turned into something different. I'd run into people at the diner or the gas station, and they'd say things like, "You're the guy who beat the HOA, right?" Or, "Wish we had your guts, man." One couple even stopped by my property to ask who my lawyer was. Apparently, Marla had tried to fine them for parking their RV in their own driveway. I gave them Rick's number without hesitation. A week later, Frank returned with another update. "She's out," he said, almost bursting with laughter. "The board voted her off last night. They said she was acting outside her authority and causing unnecessary legal exposure for the community." I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud. "You're telling me the woman who said my house destroyed community harmony just got kicked out for destroying community harmony herself?" "Pretty much," Frank said. "And guess who they elected as interim president?" "Don't tell me it's you." He grinned wider. "No, but they picked someone sane. A guy named Leonard. Retired engineer, quiet guy, hates drama. First thing he did was announce that the HOA would stop enforcing anything beyond the original property lines. You know, like it's supposed to be." That news spread faster than wildfire. People started feeling freer. No more warning letters about mailbox paint. No more fines for having garden gnomes or bird feeders. The entire neighborhood seemed lighter. A few days after Marla's downfall, I was out on the porch again when I noticed her SUV driving slowly by my fence. She stopped for a moment, engine idling, probably hoping I'd come out to confront her. But I didn't move. I just sipped my tea, looked out at the lake, and ignored her. After a few seconds, she drove off. That was the last time I ever saw her near my property. But stories like hers have a funny way of sticking around. Months later, during a local barbecue hosted by some of the residents, her name came up again. Someone said she'd moved 2 towns over, trying to start on another HOA board. The collective groan that followed was almost comical. "Poor people over there," someone said. "They have no idea what's coming." I laughed, but part of me wondered if she'd ever learned from what happened. Probably not. People like Marla rarely admit they were wrong. They just move on to the next place, trying to control someone else's peace. By then, my house was completely finished. The dock extended out into the calm blue water, and the sun reflected off the surface like gold. My wife had turned the backyard into a mini paradise, full of flowers, wind chimes, and birdhouses. Every time I walked around the property, I felt proud, not just because it was mine, but because I'd built it despite all the resistance, all the arrogance, and all the attempts to crush it. One evening, as the sky turned orange and purple, I sat out front watching the sunset. Frank stopped by again, as he often did. He looked around and said, "You know, your place ended up being the nicest one on this whole stretch of the lake. Everyone said it would ruin the view, but honestly, it's the best part of it now." I smiled. Funny how that works, huh? Yeah. I think people learn something from this. Maybe they'll stop letting one loud person tell them what they can and can't do. We sat in silence for a bit, just listening to the crickets and the water lapping against the dock. I realized how peaceful it had become. No more threats, no more letters, no more fake authority trying to run my life. But the best part came a few weeks later when I got a letter in the mail, not from the HOA, but from the county assessor's office. It was a property revaluation notice. When I opened it, I nearly laughed again. The report said that my new home had increased the overall property value of the entire lakeside stretch by over 12%. The very thing the HOA claimed was lowering community value had actually done the opposite. I made copies of that report and mailed one directly to the new HOA office. No note, no message, just the document. I figured the silence would speak for itself. A month later, I received a polite thank you card from Leonard, the new HOA president. Inside, it said, "On behalf of the Lakeside community, I apologize for the trouble caused by the previous administration. We wish you peace and enjoyment of your home. You are, of course, welcome to attend any community events, strictly as a friendly neighbor." I didn't expect that level of decency, but it felt good. I pinned the card up next to the framed court documents in my study. 2 reminders, side by side. One of what people tried to take from me, and one of how it ended, with respect, not control. That summer was the calmest one I'd had in years. My grandkids came to visit, we went fishing off the dock, and sometimes I'd catch myself looking at the water, thinking about how absurd it all was. All that fighting, all those threats, and for what? Just because someone didn't like where I built my home. One evening, as I stood outside, watching the sky fade into twilight, my wife came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. She smiled and said, "You know, if Marla could see this view now, she'd be furious." I laughed softly. Good. Maybe she'll finally understand that you can't own the horizon. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the sound of the water against the dock and the faint hum of crickets. I looked around at everything we'd built. The house, the garden, the peace, and realized something simple but powerful. Freedom isn't about living without neighbors. It's about living without people who think they own you. The HOA had tried to take that away from me, but all they'd really done was remind me how valuable it is. And sometimes, that's the best kind of victory. Not one you shout about, but one you quietly enjoy every single day, in the home they said you'd never build. Years passed, and that house by the lake became more than just a home. It became a symbol of calm defiance, a reminder that sometimes standing your ground is the only way to truly earn your peace. Life slowed down, as it should have. The seasons came and went. The trees grew taller, and the dock weathered under years of sun and rain. Each morning, I'd step out with a cup of coffee, listening to the water lap gently against the shore, feeling grateful that I never gave in to those who tried to bully me. The HOA had changed completely by then. Under Leonard's leadership, they'd stripped down half the ridiculous rules that Marla had pushed through. No more policing paint colors, no more warnings about unauthorized decorations, no more obsession over people's fences or mailboxes. The place felt like an actual community again. Neighbors waving, kids riding bikes, people planting flowers instead of worrying about getting fined for the wrong shade of mulch. Sometimes I'd attend their barbecues or community picnics. Leonard always made a point to welcome me personally. It was strange at first, being in the same association that once tried to sue me, but over time, the bitterness faded. People began to understand that not every rule needs to exist, and that some battles just aren't worth fighting. Every now and then, a new family would move in and ask me about the old HOA story. Apparently, it had turned into a bit of local legend. Kids who grew up here would tell it like a campfire tale, how the stubborn homeowner beat the HOA in court twice, and how the judge laughed them out of the room. One time, a young couple came over with blueprints for a small guest house they wanted to build near their backyard. "We wanted to check with you first," the husband said, half joking. "You're kind of the unofficial HOA historian around here." I laughed and waved a hand. "As long as you've got your permits and you're happy, you don't need anyone's permission but your own." His wife smiled. "That's what we figured." Still, it feels good to hear it from the man who started it all. Their words made me smile. I didn't set out to make a statement or start a movement. I just wanted to build my house in peace. But somehow, standing firm against unfair control ended up inspiring others to do the same. That realization carried a certain quiet pride. Every so often, I'd catch myself wondering what happened to Marla. I never saw her again after that last time she drove past my fence. Some said she tried joining another HOA a few towns over, but that didn't last long. She'd burned too many bridges and made too many enemies. There were rumors she ended up selling her house and moving to a condo somewhere with no board, no meetings, and no one left to boss around. Maybe in some strange way, she found peace too. I didn't hate her anymore. Over time, anger fades, and what's left is perspective. She wasn't the first person to abuse a bit of power, and she wouldn't be the last. But the lesson she unwillingly gave everyone here stuck for good. Rules mean nothing without reason, and authority means nothing without respect. The older I got, the more I came to appreciate the little things. The sound of the lake at night. The way the sunlight danced across the water at dusk. The smell of the pine trees after a summer rain. Sometimes, when my grandkids came to visit, I'd tell them the story, not as a rant about the HOA, but as a life lesson. I'd sit on the porch with them, rocking gently as they listened. You know, I'd say, there'll always be people who think they can tell you what to do, who believe their way is the only way. But you don't have to fight them with anger. Just know your rights, stand your ground, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. They'd nod, pretending to understand, though I knew the meaning would come to them years later, when life tested them in its own way. One summer evening, Leonard came by again, older now, gray around the edges but still as kind as ever. We sat out back watching the lake glow in the fading light. He told me that the HOA was finally being dissolved. "No one wants to run it anymore," he said, laughing softly. "Turns out people like living without all the rules." I smiled. Guess freedom caught on. He nodded. "You know, in a weird way, you did us a favor. You reminded everyone what the word home actually means." We sat there for a while without speaking. The air was warm, the sky painted in streaks of orange and pink. I could hear the soft splash of fish breaking the surface of the lake. It felt like closure, the final chapter of a story that had taken years to write. After he left, I took a slow walk down to the dock. The water was calm, reflecting the moon like a mirror. I thought about how much had changed since that first confrontation. The shouting, the lawsuits, the courtrooms, the laughter, the fence. All of it had led here, to this peace. I knelt down, ran my hand through the cool water, and smiled. "You see this view?" I murmured to myself. "They said I stole it. Turns out, it was always meant to be mine." The wind rustled through the trees as if agreeing with me. A few weeks later, my wife and I hosted a small gathering, just close friends and family. The neighbors brought food, the kids ran around playing by the water, and laughter filled the air. Frank raised his glass and toasted, "To the man who beat the HOA and taught us all what freedom looks like." Everyone cheered, and I couldn't help but laugh. "To common sense," I said, raising my glass back. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch again. The stars were scattered across the sky, bright and endless. I realized that life has a funny way of turning battles into stories, and stories into lessons. Mine wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about holding on to what's right, even when the world insists you shouldn't. I leaned back, listening to the night, and let the silence settle around me. The house stood strong behind me, the same one they'd said I couldn't build, the same one a judge once laughed over in court. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that persistence wins, not the loud kind that shouts for attention, but the quiet kind that endures everything until peace finally comes knocking. And when I looked out across the lake one last time before heading inside, I saw my reflection shimmering in the dark water. Behind it was the house, the fence, the garden, all of it bathed in moonlight. That view, the one they said I ruined, was more beautiful than ever.